So welcome to Boswell Book Company. I am Daniel from Boswell. It is day 5,422 of us being in business. Woohoo! Um, this is uh, our eighth Boswell event, not including the conversations, not including the events where I go to the public library and sell books in the back of the library. For Nick Petrie, his latest book is long awaited. The Price You Pay. This is a much bigger event than last time, I think, because you kept them waiting. So you are the Rihanna of mystery writers. So um, the book's already getting really great reviews. Publishers Weekly wrote, Petrie nimbly combines small unit action with cyber sleuthing, courtesy of Peter's partner, reporter June Cassidy, and rarely takes his foot off the gas during the narrative's 400 plus pages. Adrenaline junkies will be in heaven. And here's something from Chris Lee, who would have been here, but he's in Martinique right now. Here's something I love. A good thrillery crime novel with the speed, the swagger, and the vibes of a 90s action flick. Petrie does it right. Nick Petrie is the author of 8 novels in the Peter Ash series. Most recently, The Runaway. His debut, The Drifter, won the ITW Thriller Award and the Barry Award for Best First Novel, and was a finalist for the Edgar and the Hammett Awards. We are very honored to have, all the way from Virginia, Bill Schweigart as his conversation partner, author of The Guilty One, also available at the front desk, and Women and Children First, a story co-written by James Patterson in 3 Days to Live. Please give them a warm welcome.
But before we start talking, I just want to say thanks to all of you for coming out. It's been a couple of years. I see a lot of familiar faces. We have never had this many people here for a Nick Petrie event, and I am superbly grateful. So thank you so much, all of you, for coming.
No pressure.
Well, they're all paying very close attention to you.
You did not.
Yes.
You did not tell me there'd be this many people.
I didn't know there would be this many people.
How you doing, Sugar Dip? You doing okay?
I'm good. I'm having
glad.
a good time.
I'm glad. All right. So first of all, thank you all for coming again. Like Nick said, this is the pre-launch event.
Yes.
For The Price You Pay. So give it up for book 8 in the Peter Ash series. Tomorrow is the official launch day, but this is Nickmas Eve. So we're all very excited.
Nice.
And
very nice.
It's very customary for a launch to smash a bottle over your head to send you out on your voyage.
Sure.
So we'll do that later. For those who have maybe just wandered in off the street, and I know you're all very familiar with the Peter Ash series, could you give just a couple of quick sentences about the series and then about book 8, The Price You Pay?
Sure. Well, this is a crime series about a guy named Peter Ash, who's a Marine Corps veteran who, over the course of certainly the first 5 books, has sort of trying to figure out his way home from war. He's got post-traumatic stress. The war will always be with him. In this book, it has sort of settled down to a low simmer. And this is the book that honestly readers have been asking me for since the beginning. So this is the book that really talks a lot about Lewis. We get a lot more Lewis's sort of internal life. The plot is centered around what Lewis used to do for a living back in the bad old days when he had a crew of thieves called the Heavy Lifters. I don't know, it was I always say some books are easy to write, and then there's this one. This did take me a little extra time. But I think the hard ones are always the better ones. And I hope you guys think so too.
So I have always said, and I've told you this at your kitchen table, that you always stay a step ahead of the reader. You resist formula at every turn. Just when I'm accustomed to something, you will zig. And when I think you're going to zig, you're going to zag. Like after Light It Up and Tear It Down, you took the supporting cast and you put them aside and you sent Peter to Iceland. And then the next book, you bring the cast all back together. And then in the last one, The Runaway, you introduced a wonderful new character. Why the pivot to Lewis? Why now? Was this a conscious choice? Was this because you were trying to satisfy reader curiosity, or did this just call to you?
I've been sort of scared of this book for a while. And I just sort of felt like I needed to lean in a new direction, and I didn't quite. Every book is sort of a reaction to the one that I wrote before, right? So there's the Iceland book, the Wild One, where Peter is all by himself. But then I missed the interplay between Peter and Lewis and June, and so the next book starts with the three of them together on the first page, and it's a much more kind of local. That's sort of the second Milwaukee book. So I mean, there are some people who have a plan. There are some people who, well, I'm going to do this, and then they have a whole list of things they're going to do next. I am not that writer. I am the writer who is flying by the seat of his pants every minute of every day. But I don't know another way to do it. And every time I get too far ahead of myself, I either lose interest in the story, or I realize I'm just not sort of smart enough to land this thing. So I'm just kind of sticking with my seat of the pants approach.
Well, you could have fooled me, because you executed it beautifully. I'm a huge fan of this book, and I'm a huge fan of Lewis. He is one of my favorite supporting characters in all of fiction. And Peter calls him the most dangerous man alive. And over the course of 8 books, we certainly see that put into action. But when you have to reveal the backstory of a character, that you've alluded to this dark history, there's a lot of mystique, there's a lot of intrigue. And when you decide to tell that and reveal that backstory, you run the risk of it not meeting readers' expectations, which you threaded the needle beautifully. I just wanted to know, as a writer, how did you calibrate that? How did you know when to reveal too much, when to pull back? Because I think you threaded it beautifully.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, there was a lot of gnashing of teeth about sort of how much of Lewis to give you and how much of Lewis to hold back. And I did worry that, if I said too much, that, he's sort of been the mysterious sidekick. But I would like to, I don't really believe in sidekicks or secondary characters. Even Lewis doesn't think he's a secondary character, right? Lewis is the hero of his own story. And so I like everybody to kind of have this full story, but I don't know. The goal in part was to sort of elevate Lewis into a more complete character, and to be something more than the most dangerous man Peter's ever met. So to get into his head and to get into his complicated feelings about what he used to do for a living was hard, and took a lot of throwing out chapters and writing new chapters and throwing those out, and hence the 2-year process.
That was my next question. There's the plot mechanics of, okay, how do we reveal enough backstory? But now for the sort of moralizing, how did you calibrate that? Because Lewis in this book, you don't shy away from the fact that he had a dark past. There's a 10-year period where the heavy lifters are in business. Their adversaries call them the Ghost Killers. They're a bad crew, but they've got a code. So, you could have the meanest person on the page, but if they like dogs, you're like, well, they can't be that bad.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So how did you, and we've got Mingus, but how did you calibrate that? Because I never lost sympathy for Lewis, but he's a bad customer.
Well, I'm glad you didn't lose sympathy. That was kind of my other main concern. So I sort of did the math. I'd already sort of started this book, and I was like, all right, so let's say Lewis and his crew were in business for 10 years. And let's say they did 10 jobs a year. And at every given job, let's say they killed 5 people. So that's 500 people, right? So that is like serious serial killer.
Nick Petrie has written the most charismatic mass murderer
right? Yeah.
in the history of fiction.
Yeah, this could be Kosovo or something. So I had to find a way to give it some meaning and to give it sort of to introduce some morality to it. And so I gave Lewis a code, and that he has really imposed on his crew. And some of them, I don't know if you remember Nino and Ray from the first book, The Drifters. Ray is all about that. Ray understands that, like, there should be rules of engagement, and you don't get to kill anybody you want. But if someone points a gun at you, it's fair game. Nino is a little more like, yeah, I don't buy that, but you're the boss, so I will do what you say. But I had to sort of find a way to give him that sense of a moral structure. And then the other piece of it was that I had to figure out how he felt about those days now, right? So when he and Peter meet in book 1, the heavy lifters are still in business. And because of what happens at the end of that book, there's a pile of money. Lewis decides to get out of the business. He gets reunited with his high school sweetheart, and he decides he's gonna go straight. And but not all the way, maybe, or he's semi-retired, let's say. But so I never really talked about sort of what it was like to have done that and now go to this life where you're a family man, and he's raising these 2 boys, and he's trying to be a role model and an example. And so that was another hard needle to thread, because he's not ashamed of himself. He's not, he's very good at what he did, but he always meant to get out 5 years in 5 years, and he just kept going. The money was too good, and what else was he going to do anyway? So it was an interesting challenge to sort of figure that out.
So, all right, the moralizing aside, how fun was it to write Lewis Unleashed? Because there's a sequence in the book, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but where you get to see Lewis in full ghost killer mode. Like, you're getting it from the bad guy's POV, and it put a smile on my face, ear to ear, but it also made the hair on my arm stand up. So to get to be on the receiving end of that, cool Lewis swagger, and it was terrifying, but it was gleeful. But how fun was that?
Oh, it was a bunch of fun. So this is basically you get to see into Lewis's past, and so you get a view of what he used to do and how he used to do it, and to figure that part out was a lot of fun, and to sort of see how he works with these guys he used to work with before, and what that dynamic was. There's a scene where they're following somebody. They're trying to see if they have a tail, and just to write that dialogue and to have them giving each other shit was a bunch of fun. And the action stuff, I don't know, that just does kind of make me smile. It's fun to do. It exercises all of my worst impulses I can put on the page.
But you also write tech and cybery stuff really good. And I work for a cybersecurity agency, and I say cybery stuff, which nothing to me is more.
Isn't that the technical term?
It is tech. I don't
Yeah,
want to show off, but that is kind of how we talk about it. But nothing is more boring to me than somebody on a keyboard. But you liven that up, and you always, like the chase that you're talking about. There's geotagging, and there's always a technical aspect to your books, and I find it riveting. What is your philosophy on that? Because what I like to do is take my characters' cell phones, break them, throw them in a river, and oh crap, because it's a deus ex machina, but you steer into the skid and you employ it, and it makes it that much more tense.
Well, so I'm really interested in technology, and these are not super technology driven books. There are a couple of these books there's more tech than others. Just because that's me kind of scratching that itch. I grew up, in addition to reading crime, I was reading sci-fi, so I like all that stuff. But I mean, this is the modern world. This is how people function in the world, and you can buy, air tags for $25, You know, all of that tech has gotten so cheap, and it's not just cops who are using it, right? So, you know, bad guys are using it, are actually really good at all that stuff. The problem with sort of leaning fully into sort of technology and cybercrime is that, yes, it is boring to have the suspenseful keyboard scene, but it's also, yeah. I mean, I guess you could hit somebody with your keyboard, um, but it's also like so much of it actually happens now remotely. There's so much crime that's done over the internet, and it's fascinating to read about. But you know, in you know, in a nonfiction format, but I don't know how to make that interesting as a writer. And that's also has this international scope, right? So there are these crews in Russia who are stealing social security checks from retirees, right? But like, you know, how does Peter deal with that, right? So that requires a different hero to fight those kinds of fights. But I can't sort of shy away from it. Not that I'm a super techno guy myself. My phone, I just checked my phone to see if I need a new one, and the resale value of it is $31.
Your phone should be in the Smithsonian.
Yeah.
I've seen your phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, my laptop stopped. Microsoft Word stopped supporting my laptop on January 1st.
Oh, there you
I'm
go.
like, January 1st, I'm going to hit my word count. They're like, no, you're not. You're going to buy a new laptop.
Oh dear.
So you introduce an outstanding new character. You always introduce these tilted, off-kilter side characters. And
Those
tell
are the
me,
ones that are most like me.
they are, yes. Tell us a little bit about Teddy, because he was my favorite.
Teddy just kind of showed up. I didn't really know what he was going to be like. So Teddy is the on again, off again fourth member of Lewis's crew. So Nino and Ray are guys that he knew from when he was in the army. They're sort of the stalwarts. But then sometimes they needed somebody like Teddy, who was a little bit of safecracker, was a little bit of enforcer. He's a very large man. And at one of their jobs, he ends up getting shot in the head, which is not an ideal outcome. And so rather than leave him there with his eyeball hanging out, they throw him in the car and they drop him rather quickly at a hospital quite some distance away. And then Lewis keeps tabs on him over the years because somebody needs to. And he's got a little bit of brain damage, and it's changed his personality. I should say that there was also a character who is a speech pathologist who I started writing before I met my neighbor Jackie, who also happens to be a speech pathologist. So, oh, there she is. Hi, Jackie. So Jackie, this character is not based
No
on you.
offense.
Yeah, this character is not
Yeah.
based on you at all. And thanks for coming. But so Teddy is just he is sort of a teddy bear. He's a little sweet and he's a little nuts. He's got a lot of energy. And he's sort of the wild card. You know, there's the dynamic between Peter and Lewis and like doing what's right. And then Teddy is sort of it's all his fault. I mean, he's the one who kicked off this whole thing. And this is not a spoiler because it's on the book jacket, so I'm allowed to talk about that. But so some people figured out that Teddy was a member of this crew once upon a time, and went up to his cabin in northern Wisconsin, and they stole these notebooks that he had been using for therapy to write down what he could remember. And what he could remember were all the details of all the jobs that they pulled. So, you know, Lewis is pissed, understandably. You know, that's one of the rules of being a big time criminal is you just don't write it down. But so that's kind of the conceit that kicks it off. But you know, and he's gone sort of to the other side, right? His bookshelves are full of books on Buddhism. He become a vegetarian. He stopped slapping mosquitoes, you know. But then he needs to, you know, he needs to make this thing right. And so, you know, we sort of see him go back and forth from these different versions of himself. His nickname was Upstate Wilson back in the day because he always talked about everything was better upstate. So he became Upstate Wilson. And so every once in a while, Upstate Wilson sort of shows up. But there are characters that just kind of do that for me. I mean, in the last book, Helene,
Oh, I love Helene.
I just started writing about her and not really knowing if there was a Peter Ash story in this or not. She just sort of showed up. And then I had to figure out how to, how to include Peter Ash, or was I going to do something different? So it's a weird process.
So if you haven't read The Runaway, I can't recommend it enough. Nick cedes half of the story real estate to Helene, to this character, and she was so compelling that when Peter would stick his head back up, I'm like, okay, all right, wait your turn. We like Helene, but again, you keep it, you give me what I want without realizing that I want it, because on page 2, Lewis is back in play for this book.
Right.
Back to him. One of the things that I was just curious if this was intentional or not. Peter has the white static and Lewis has the black dog. After a job, he would get depressed and racked with guilt, and you sort of externalize that.
I
wanna say
hadn't made
trauma.
that connection.
You hadn't?
No.
Score 1 for me.
Oh,
See, I pay attention.
Interesting. You do.
Come
I
on.
appreciate that, Bill.
So was that intentional, or do you just
No, it's about
you made it a character?
Well, yeah, it's about trying to find a way to talk about people's emotional states without saying he felt sad, or in part it's just sort of a writer's trick to talk about, not to personify per se, although I guess that's part of what I did. But the black dog is a term that's been around for a couple hundred years for that sort of post-combat, post-adrenaline crash. There's a great series of books by Patrick O'Brien, the Aubrey Maturin series set in the Napoleonic Wars seafaring books. There's 21 or 22 of them. And he talks about, and these were written 20 years ago. And so I totally stole that from those books. And if you guys like series fiction, these are sort of adventure novels, and you'll learn more about wooden ships than you might ever want to know. But they're wonderfully written. And they really transport you to a different time and place.
But again, you walk that tightrope so beautifully. He has remorse. He doesn't kill Teddy. He drops him off at a hospital. Teddy screws up royally. He doesn't take him out then, and Teddy.
But he thinks about it.
He thinks about it.
He thinks about it.
We can't be locked up for what we think about it. Thank goodness.
Thank God. Yeah.
Yes. Again, you always have such great characters, and you invest even just cameos with life. And there is one character that you meet in an auto shop that I wanted to read. We have a friend by the name of Don Bentley, also a very nice writer, former FBI guy.
Former Apache helicopter pilot, real world war hero guy.
Yeah. Don Bentley's Texas Motors. He wore the wide, bushy mustache of an 80s porn star and a comb over blown the wrong way by the wind. Bentley's so damn crooked, he can't even pee straight. Or I have to go back to Peter Ash 4, Tear It Down.
Yes, you got it.
Old
Okay.
Doc Schweigart had lost his license. His pale hands were shaky and his brain was wet. You could pay him in liquor. He could even be kind when he'd had enough to drink. Call me Bill, he'd say, swaying on the street corner, and tell unlikely lies about his years in the Coast Guard. We're his friends. Are we good?
It's just part of the fun.
Ah,
It's to roast your friends.
I can't wait to come up with the most reprehensible Nick Petrie character.
Well, so Don is actually somebody who has a certain amount of moral fiber. So I had tried to give him other roles in previous books. So he was going to be a surgeon specializing in penis enlargement. But he that was not acceptable to him, for good reason. But so apparently being a used car chop shop specialist.
I'm sure he will love this depiction. You won't have any problems at all. So what are you reading right now? What is firing you up? Now that you're done, not that you have any ample downtime, but what are you going to take on the plane? What are you going to read? What are you going to
I'm in the middle of Dennis Lehane's new book, Small Mercies, which is astonishing, extremely well written, um, deeply moving, in fact. It's not an easy read per se, but it moves right along. It's a it's a portrait of a community disguised as a crime novel. But it's also very much a crime novel. There's, you know, the heroine is in dire straits. The bad guys are really very bad. It's set in the right in the basically the busing riots of 1974 in Boston, in Southeast. So it's South Boston, which is, you know, the racist heart of white Boston. So that's all, that stuff is all through the book, and it's astonishing. And he said it's his last book, which kind of makes me sad.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. He does a lot of TV stuff. I think that's a lot more of what his interest is in. But
Well, before I turn it over to the audience for questions, Margaret had a great question that I'm going to mercilessly steal.
Oh, no.
No,
Oh,
this
no.
is the one that you heard, and this is my Barbara Walters. You know, Nick, what was the price you paid to write this book?
Well, the fact that it took 2 years felt like a pretty heavy lift to me.
It was absolutely so worth the wait. It was a full meal. I enjoyed every minute. I inhaled it in 3 sittings. And I say this to you every time. It is my favorite yet.
I appreciate that. Wait, I do want to say one thing. So as part of the writing of this book, I had a bunch of false starts. And I started writing about sort of Lewis's past while he was in it, right? So it begins with Lewis fresh off a job at 24. And I just couldn't find a way to kind of bring it back into sort of present day Peter and Lewis. And that's part of why it took me so freaking long, is I ended up throwing out basically 5 months worth of work. But I did turn it into a novella. So if anybody is interested in reading something that is all Lewis all the time,
In the bad old days.
in the bad old days, it's called The Cleveland Job. And you can find it in this great little crime quarterly called Mystery Tribune. So you can buy it in hard, you know, in paper form, or you can buy it in electronic form from Barnes & Noble or Amazon. Just search for Mystery Tribune number 21. And it was a bunch of fun to write, and I want to get it read because it's not going to be in super wide distribution. So I just want to shout that out.
The Cleveland Job.
Yeah, it takes place in Cleveland.
You're not supposed to write it down, Nick, don't you know?
Oh shit!
The first rule of criming is don't write about criming.
Yeah.
Look at all the beautiful people that we've got tonight. I don't want to jabber, so I want to throw it open to questions. Who here has questions for Mr. Petrie on Merry Nickmas Eve?
Sir, one of the things I remember, I think from your first book, when Peter Ash comes home, you say something to the effect of, a lot of people say, thank you for your service to veterans, and you say the appropriate, I don't know if that's the right word, thing to say is welcome home. And I have heard some veterans take offense to thank you for your service. So where did that come from? How much of that is part of Peter? How true is that?
So the question is that in the first book, Peter talks about people who say thank you for your service, and it frustrates him. And what he would like to hear is welcome home. And that really comes from, I heard that from a veteran. When I was, my previous to being a full-time writer, I was a freelance home inspector. So you'd hire a guy like me to tell you what was wrong with your house. And after the surge in Iraq, I had a lot of clients who were coming home from war. And I'm a curious guy and I like people. And you know, sometimes we had some interesting conversations, and that was one of those conversations. But that idea dates all the way back to Vietnam, where Vietnam vets, because they were not welcomed home at all, right? Now we may have some doubts about our wars, but we've gotten pretty good at supporting our warriors. But you know, Vietnam era, not so much. So you know, vets from Vietnam, that's how they would greet each other, right? And it, you know, was welcome home. So that's kind of where that came from. And so I've heard comments about that since the very first book. I have people who reach out to me online who, were in the service, who went through some not so great stuff. So again, my goal is to make the emotional lives real, right? To have them feel true. And it's one reason why I don't think I'll ever write about Peter when he was, in Iraq really fighting, because like that's a world that is too complex for me to really capture. I wasn't there. I've never done that. But I can write about sort of the emotional aftermath of it. Because we've all been through something horrific that we're trying to, find our way out of, right?
Who else has a question? Yes.
The question is, some of my books feature Milwaukee and some do not, and how do I decide? And in part, so I didn't really, so the first book is set in Milwaukee because that's where I live, and I hadn't really planned to write a series. I never thought that first book would get published. So, why would I plan more than one? And then to my surprise, somebody said they wanted not just one, but two. And so here we are. But the goal after that first one was to sort of keep Peter moving on. And he has a little bit of a home base where June's father lived in Western Washington. But I didn't think he'd come back to Milwaukee, but it was the pandemic. And so I couldn't really travel. And so, gosh, let's write a Milwaukee book. I mean, it's very prosaic. But it's, there are lots of strange reasons why, kind of that sort of stuff happens. But it's fun to, it was fun to write about sort of a different version of Milwaukee. The first book is sort of River West, really gritty. The second book is sort of a South Side book, right? So it's much more kind of Milwaukee's, sort of industrial past when we were the machine shop to the world. So to sort of have some of that kind of makery stuff in it. So there will be, I'm sure there'll be another Milwaukee book. I'll just have to figure out what version of Milwaukee I want to write about. Yes, sir.
That was my question. This is up in Milwaukee and related to the different places that they went. In the books now, if you relate it to some of those things in the past, I just afraid a lot of readers wouldn't know what you were talking about. A lot of those things are gone.
Oh, yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, that is a risk. I mean, in my first book, I referred to my favorite coffee shop, Altera, which is now known as Colectivo. So, you do this long enough and you'll, the world changes. But I don't know. I mean, there's a certain point where those car fins on Humboldt are going to be gone too, but I hope it never happens. Yeah. Yes, sir. Well, I had a lot of help with that. I went to high school with Raquel Kern Rutledge, who was one of their Pulitzer-winning team, and she was very kind enough to let me pick her brain about. And this was for The Breaker, which is 2 books ago. I went to visit her at work, and I got to pick her brain about sort of what it's like to be an investigative reporter. Because that's a book where really there's a lot more June, right? I wanted June to have a more prominent role, and I wanted to see, kind of what professional chops June could bring to the table. And so, and I mean, again, I live in fear of boring my readers. I live in fear of having the books feel too similar. Every once in a while, I'll pick up a book from a writer that I've been reading, and I'll get 100 pages in or 200 pages in, and I'll just say, oh crap, I've read this before. And I don't ever want anybody to have that experience. I want my books to be so distinct that they stand out. And whether I'm going to be able to continue doing that in another 5 years or 10 years, God only knows. But I think a lot about that stuff, and I've been a fan of sort of crime series since I was a kid. So there's a lot of that. I think about the ones that I think were really successful at it, and ones that I think, yeah, not so much.
Was your friend upset when you asked about the newsroom and then shot it up in The Breaker?
No, actually, I got some feedback from some Journal Sentinel employees who, including Jim Higgins. I don't know if Jim is here. I did not see him. He's their arts reviewer who wrote a very nice piece in the Journal Sentinel about this book. But he just was like, I will never think of that space the same again. And now, again, back to your point, right? So they're no longer in that building, right? So they've moved. The building's I don't know if they're gonna tear it down or what they're gonna do to it. But so, the world does move on.
So is your brain always on when you're going to different sites around Milwaukee? And because I know that my wife, Kate, gets pissed at me because I'll take her out to a nice dinner and we'll pass a cobblestone street. And I'll be like, oh, that's a great place to drop a body. And she's like,
Yeah.
she's like, so romantic. Can't wait till the next date night.
Yeah, it is the kind of job that it's hard to turn off. For me, I'll be having dinner with Margaret and I'll realize she'll have been talking to me and I'm, and she'll like, you are not even here. Where are you right now? So
like
I mean,
deep into my mind palace.
yeah, I'm making shit up.
Let's go back there first.
Is this going to be another one of your heckling questions, Brooke? Yeah, okay, just checking. No, it's entirely insane. The whole, like, the idea that, so yeah, the books show up in the mail to me. I get a couple of cases for myself. That's part of the deal. And so I, send them to friends and blah, blah, blah. But I open that cover and it's like books by Nick Petrie. And it's like, holy crap. Like, I wrote a bunch of books. Like, it's still kind of amazing to me. And to now be at a point where, writers who have not been doing this as long as I have will ask me for help with something or advice, or they'll ask for a blurb from me. It's kind of an amazing thing. I never thought I would, honestly, I wrote 3 books I couldn't get published. And then I wrote this book that I really thought wasn't going to get published called The Drifter. And, it's just sort of all been kind of a dream since then, for sure.
Your material and content comes from Hollywood. If so, who would play Peter? And if you don't have anyone, can I give you the name of my agent?
I could see it.
Yeah.
I could see it.
Yeah. Did everybody hear the question? All right. So yeah, it's actually been an interesting development in the last month or so. So this had been optioned for television about 2 years ago, and there are 2 great showrunners, and there's a pilot script that was ready to get out. They were gonna put it out for sale, send it off to all the streamers, blah blah blah, and then the Hollywood writer's strike happened, and so that's the lawyers consider that to be an act of God. So it's just like a pause on that 18-month contract. So, and then it ended, and like, I'd never really heard anything else. And what I'd read a lot of was that, well, a lot of projects that might have been happening are no longer happening because the economics are changing. And so I just sort of thought, well, that was an interesting experience. But so they just renewed that option, which tells me that they're actually serious about it. Although it, it's sort of like, winning the lottery twice is what the showrunners say, is to actually get it someplace that it's going to get made and then have it turn out as well as we would like to make it. But who knows? It's not a fast process. But I don't have anybody in mind. So leave me your card and yeah.
I always just pictured you when I read it.
I
The first
appreciate
couple
that.
of books.
I appreciate
I'm
that. Or
stopped
Jason
at-
Statham.
Or Jason Statham. And then I just started picturing you.
Peter came from those conversations with those young men and women who'd come back from war. And I'm not a veteran. Peter is not me, but that sensibility, right, is mine. Peter always calls people ma'am and sir. That's part of my home inspection life because I could never remember anybody's fucking name. And so everybody was ma'am or sir, And so part of it is just, and I wanted, I'm a Midwesterner, right? I'm a nice Wisconsin boy. And I wanted to have some of that sort of Midwestern nice be part of this very sort of strong, forceful person. And so Peter, he introduces himself to people. My parents always said, stick out your paw when I was a kid, so I got very used to putting out my hand. And so part of it is just sort of some of these things of mine. And it's kind of my sense of humor. But, I had followed those wars, right? I read the paper. I've read memoir and all that other stuff. But, we don't really pay any attention to what it's like to come home. And after the most profound experience in pretty much anybody's life, to sort of say, well, gee, maybe I'll go to work at Home Depot, or whatever, or try to go back to school when you're, 6 years older than everybody else, and you've had this experience that they can't begin to imagine. So that was the journey that I was trying to tell in that first book, and it became sort of the organizing principle of the series, which was, people with post-traumatic stress don't simply get better, right? They're not get cured, but they can develop a different relationship to it. They can make friends with it, and there are some very simple, very powerful techniques that you can use to deal with it. And so I wanted to show sort of Peter's evolution, because the response I got from veterans to that first book was so powerful. All these folks who really felt like I had seen them. And how did I know what it was like to have post-traumatic stress? Because the white static is exactly their experience. And I, again, I didn't sit down and interview people and say, what's it like when it flares up? It just came out of my head. But I realized I had kind of a responsibility to those people to help chart the path. So the things that Peter does, meditation and yoga and going to veterans groups where you can talk about your experiences with other people who have been there. I mean, these are really simple and very effective things that vets can do. The Army has people meditating and doing yoga. Like, if the Army is all about that, I figure maybe there's something to it if this conservative institution is pushing this stuff. So that's really where Peter came from, and the veteran piece came from. And I never imagined that I would be getting, a Facebook message from somebody who said, I was getting ready to kill myself when somebody gave me your book, and I realized I just had post-traumatic stress. I was not going insane, and so I got help. And by the way, here's a picture of me and my wife and my 3 kids. Like, to have that response, like that, it means so much to me that I actually, like, this thing that I wrote that I wanted to be fun and a fast read to keep you turning the pages, that it also had this other component to it that carried some meaning for people. So, I don't know, long answer to a short question.
Great answer. Have you had any vets then come out and say, hey, I tried some of the techniques that Peter tried?
I have not.
But because I've never heard you talk about, like, it's your responsibility to sort of chart the course where you're sort of planting seeds, like this is sort of a path to learning to live with it. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, no, I haven't had those. People don't often reach out to me more than once or twice. And I think part of it is I'm a safe person to talk to, right? When I was a home inspector, I wasn't part of their service family, right? I didn't serve with them. I'm not part of their biological family. And so, like, when you're a combat vet, like, there are things you don't want to tell your mom and your sister, your wife, your brother, things that you've done, things that you've seen, right? You're either not super proud of it, or you want to protect them from that view of the world. But also with your service family, you're not going to be super vulnerable, right? You're going to, because the ethos of the armed forces is to be strong and tough and suck it up. Pain is weakness leaving the body. And so how do you process those feelings with that group? You can't. So I was the guy who I'm in this house. The mom and the spouse are upstairs, and I'm downstairs with the vet, and wearing an army t-shirt. And I say, "So you were in the army, huh?" And out it comes, because they were going to meet me for 3 or 4 hours. They're never going to see me again. So I think that's part of that process, is like, I can reach out to you, and I respond to everybody. Everybody that contacts me, I thank them, and I try to have a conversation. But I think part of it is just, reaching out was enough, or hard enough maybe, for them.
Great answer. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Come across any plot lines from airport conversations after
No, so my friend Jim Gent, who is alluding to a guy that I met in the Phoenix airport, who was moving to Oregon to start a pot farm, sort of right at the dawn of legality. And so that conversation was the beginning of my book, Light It Up, which is set in Colorado, about sort of the sort of semi-legal world of cannabis sales. No, it's weird though. Like, I don't really know where those ideas are going to show up. And I am somebody that people tell strange things to, right? So in the basement of somebody's house, or in line at the coffee shop or whatnot. I had a woman, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. I'm standing in line at Sendik's, and she says, we're chatting. She says, I think I'm going to get divorced. Like, good for you. Like, how do
Was she auditioning you? I mean,
maybe, I don't know, but I have always, I don't know if it's my face or the fact that I'm interested in people, or that I really look at people, but people have always told me crazy stuff. And it is one of my superpowers as a writer, to be the recipient of that stuff. But I'm always on the lookout, and anybody who knows me knows that you really need to be a little careful what you tell me, because it just might end up in a book.
weren't you halfway down another book when that airport conversation happened? And when do you say, all right, I'm going to jettison the current idea because this one is too marvelous and it seized you?
Well, I sort of thought, wow, this is amazing. I'm just going to kind of put this in my pocket for the next book. But I was writing a book that was set in Detroit, and I was sort of trying to, like, Elmore Leonard is one of my literary heroes, and he's written all of these wonderful books set in Detroit. And Lauren Esselman writes these great kind of hard-boiled PI books set in Detroit. So there's all of this kind of legacy to it. And I wrote the same 10,000 words over and over again. And at one point, Margaret just said, have you thought about, and this is why it's really important to marry well when you're a writer, because sometimes you need to hear something that you're not hearing from yourself. And Margaret has never shied away from telling me things that she thinks I should hear.
My bride did the same thing. I was working on a book and I was just getting nowhere, and she told me to ditch it and go with this other idea I had. And then I wrote a question into a podcast, and the podcaster said, you should ditch that idea and go with the secondary idea. So I started the next day, and Kate will not let me live it down.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, sure, when that guy tells you. So that brings me to the question, what are you cooking next? What's going on? I know everybody hates it. You're like, I'm promoting this book. Can't we just enjoy this? But what's going on next? What do you?
I am almost done with a standalone book set in southwestern Wisconsin, which is probably not the thing to talk about when I'm been 2 years late on a Peter Ash novel. But this book took so much out of me. I needed kind of a break. And this book has I think a level of intensity that some of my other books don't have. The stakes are very
Have you read your
personal.
books? They're all very intense.
Yeah, I don't know. So I wanted to do something that was not a Peter Ash character. I didn't want to write a Helene book. I didn't want to write a spin-off. And Peter is a guy who is really in flux in the world, right? He doesn't really have a home. And he's not surrounded by family. And so I thought, well, okay, I'm just going to flip all that. And so this is about a guy, and also Peter is a hero, right? So I wanted to write about a guy who maybe could be a hero if he could get there. So it's a book about a guy named Bobby Crookshank, who is an ex-con, who is trying to stay sober and figure out kind of his next moves. And his little brother, Paul, is killed in the parking lot of a roadhouse. And Paul is the least likely person that you would ever find killed in the parking lot of a roadhouse. He's a lawyer. He is sort of the best of this whole family of miscreants. He's the one who kind of made it out. And the county sheriff, there are no leads. There are no, everybody sort of is like, this is just a random killing. But Bobby Crookshank knows that that's not the case. And so he is really putting everything on the line. Maybe he'll end up back in prison. Maybe he'll end up back at the bar to figure out what happened to his little brother, Paul. So again, loaded with family. We have, multiple generations, his cousins, his uncle, and it's this beautiful landscape of southwestern Wisconsin, the Driftless region, which is, if anybody's ever been there, it is just absolutely gorgeous. So that's kind of what I'm working on.
Outstanding.
Yep.
I know everybody has books that we want to get signed, but
Are we done?
no, I was just going to ask for what we got. One more audience question. Anyone? Going once? Going twice?
Oh, they've had enough.
Outstanding. More time to sign. Well, I wanted to thank everybody for coming out on a Monday night. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you, Daniel, for hosting, and thank everybody at Boswell Books. And of course, thank you for writing another wonderful book, The Price You Pay.
And
Out tomorrow.
thank you. And I just want to say thanks to my friend Bill for coming all the way here to have this conversation. I
My
really appreciate it.
pleasure.
And his book is The Guilty One, and if you read it, you will not regret it.
Stop.
We may not have any left by the end of the night. So except for you to buy it. Or else, I don't know, something. So we are signing at the front of the store. This is the aisle in which people are signing. Nick is going to come up with me. He is not going to stop to talk to you, no matter how related you are and whether you're his biggest fan. The books are at the front desk. They're not on the line. They're at the front desk. All the books are there. Front desk. So thank you all for coming. We wouldn't have a bookstore without you. Thank you to Bill for a wonderful conversation. Hope to see you at another event.